Hi everyone, Richard here, and I am starting my new video series, The Horror, the Terror. And what better place to start this series than in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Why Phoenixville, Pennsylvania? Because Phoenixville, Pennsylvania has this. Now, if you don't immediately recognize this theater, you may recognize the name, The Blob. Okay, so the setup for The Blob. You got the beginning of the movie, you have Steve, who is a 28-year-old high school student, played by Steve McQueen, and he's in Lover's Lane with his girlfriend Jane, and they have a little smoochy session in which they see a falling star, a meteorite, and that just crashes nearby. So Steve said, hey, let's go see if we can find it. So they drive off going to find it. The meteorite landed near the shack of an old homeless man. Apologize for the noise, it's a very busy road here. So the homeless man and his dog, they come across the meteorite where it cracks open to reveal this ooze that is coming out. The old man picks it up with the ooze with the stick, and it starts climbing up the stick. And so when examining it, he holds the stick up, and the blob then just rushes down, encapsulating the man's hand, and it starts dissolving his hand. It was very painful. So he goes running off into the woods, screaming and carrying on, as you would when you got this thing dissolving your hand. So on the main road, Steve and Jane are trying to figure out where exactly the meteorite landed, and as driving by, they nearly hit the old man who comes rushing out of the woods. So the old man collapses, and they take him, so they put him in the back of the car, and his dog too, and they take him to the house of Dr. Hallen, the town doctor, who is getting ready to go on a fishing trip. And that is going to be our next location, which I actually filmed yesterday, so you'll see me wearing a different shirt. Right here, we have the house of Dr. Hallen. And he was the doctor that Steve and Jane brought the old man to see about getting medical attention after the blob had attached itself to his hand. And so they would have come right here and would have brought in the old man, while the doctor, who was getting ready to go on a weekend-long fishing trip, had to stay because, hey, the doctor is going to take care of the patient. So Steve and Jane leave to come back out to the car to find Steve's friends, who they had passed by earlier while trying to rush to get to the doctor's house, sitting outside, and they challenged him to a race. Now, I don't believe they actually did the drag race on this street. That was probably a different street, but they did the drag race backwards, in which Dave, the police chief, caught Steve and Jane and gave them a reprimand, but Steve promised not to do it again and let them go. Now, obviously, being private residences, I don't want to go on the property because that would be trespassing you, and you want to be respectful. I mean, people live here, and living at a very famous location like this, you got jerks like me coming up all the time, probably take pictures and things like that. So I'm going to keep my distance. I'm going to stay on this side of the street. But bug. There are bugs in the trees. Okay, so we're going to try that again. So I'm going to keep my distance, but be respectful. And we're going to point out one other thing about this house. Now, the house itself, though, the beautiful house, was built in 1896. So it's about 126 years old, if I'm doing my math right. It's absolutely a beautiful house. It looks just like it did in the film in 1958, 65 years ago, or 64 years ago, like probably 65 from when they filmed it. It has some minor touch-ups on, some repainting and stuff, but it still looks exactly the same. Now, when Steve comes back to Dr. Hallen's house to see about the old man, he's not answering the door. So Steve walks onto the side of the house and sees Dr. Hallen And one of these ones, I'm not exactly sure which one it is. I want to say it was this one was Dr. Hallen's office, and that's where he sees the Blob consuming Dr. Hallen. Again, just to give you an idea of where these locations are in relation to each other, Dr. Hallen's house is just a 4-minute walk from the elementary school that doubles as the high school. That is just come up to 2nd Avenue right here, which is right there, and then you make a left and you walk down for about 4 minutes and you'll come to the school. If you keep going straight like we're doing now, it'll be another 5-minute walk right there to the Colonial Theater, where the Blob attacks all the people in the movie theater, and then everyone comes rushing out in probably the most famous scene from the film. And we've seen a lot of the exteriors of the filming locations. The interiors were all filmed on sound stages that were also located here in this area. One of them burned down years ago. Well, what's left up is just like the brick. All that's left is just like the brick foundation. It's about maybe 3-4 feet high. Two of the other places are used by I guess local theater groups, and used for like costume storage and things like that from what I've seen online. So they still exist, but things like the police station, the house, the homes like Jane's home and Steve's home and all, those were all just interior sets. They didn't actually film in people's homes. Okay, we are in the town of Royersford, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which again is about a 35-minute drive or so from Phoenixville. And behind me is a Dollar General, and it's like a little small strip mall. This was the location of Jerry's Market, which was used as the location for Steve's family's supermarket. While driving down the road, Jane notices the old man's dog, and he runs inside the supermarket. Jane and Steve go after him, and that's where they discover the Blob is inside the supermarket, and they have to hide out in the freezer section. And the Blob tries to squeeze in underneath the door of the walk-in freezer, but stops and gets out. It's also the location of the scene later on where the rest of the gang use the car's horns and even an air raid siren to wake up the town, and all the townsfolk come out here to see what the heck is going on, along with Dave, the police chief, and tell them, hey, break it up, come on, let's go back to bed, nothing to see here. But then that's when they hear the screams coming from the direction of the theater, and that's our next location. And we do have right here the famous Colonial Theater. If you remember in the movie, this is the theater where Steve's friends went to go see a midnight showing of a typical 1950s B movie, where the Blob worked its way up into the air conditioning ducts, got into the projection room, ate the projectionist, and then squeezed itself out through the windows and started attacking the theater goers. And then when the people in the theater realized what was going on, they all ran into panic and all come running, streaming out of the theater. Okay, I'm going to try to get this part done as quickly as I can because it's starting to rain. So while Steve and Dave and the fire chief and everyone is over at the grocery store, and the people running from the theater in the panic, they run around the corner, and that's when Steve and them all notice the people running and think, the movie theater. Well, that's the corner that they ran around right here. And this is actually about a 35-minute drive from the movie theater. So again, a little bit of movie magic. It's a restaurant called Anna Marie's. But that's it. Now, in the movie, as the people come swarming out of the theater, and they go running down the street, around the corner, Steve and Jane and the firemen I believe, if I remember correctly, it's been a couple weeks since I watched the movie, running up this way and seeing what all the commotion was. And then Jane's little brother turns out to be right across the street with his little cap gun and his little footy pajamas shooting at the Blob. And Jane and Steve grab him, and then they take refuge inside of a diner that was right across the street. But through the use of movie magic, they made the diner appear across the street, because in reality, this is what's across the street. Restaurants and shops. I am now about a 30-minute drive from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, in the town of Downingtown, Pennsylvania. If I'm saying that right, Downingtown, Pennsylvania. It'd be nice to see it more clearly. And this is the home of the diner that you see in the finale of The Blob. Now here we have the diner. Now, first of all, this is not the original diner. This is the location of the diner seen in the 1958 film The Blob. That building had been torn down or moved, or I can't remember exactly what. This has been open since, I believe, 2013, but it's still made to look like your classic diner. It does say it's open 24 hours, but sadly, they only have hours of 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And it is now currently 5:30 p.m. So that means my dinner, which I was planning on having here, I'm gonna go back to that Irish place and have it over there instead. But that's all good. Maybe I can make it out here tomorrow. We'll give it a shot. Now in the film, the Phoenix Theater would have been across the street. Everyone's running from panic. Jane, Steve, Dave, and the police chief, and the fire chief, they come running around the corner, seeing what's going on. And the Blob is coming out of the theater, going after the people. And then Jane witnesses her little brother Danny, who was across the street in the parking lot here at the diner. And Danny, he's gangster AF, all right? He's like a honey badger. He just don't give AF. You know, I don't swear, sorry. But he's taking out his little pop gun and he's firing little caps at the Blob. Bang, bang, bang. And then when he ran out of caps, you know, he don't care. He'll take on anything. Because Danny, he's a man. He took that gun, throws it at the Blob, and then takes off running towards the diner. Steve and Jane go running after him, pick him up, and they go try to hide from the Blob inside the diner. The Blob goes chasing after them and then encompasses the entirety of the diner. Now, there are power lines above, right above the diner. So I don't know if that was movie magic or matte painting, because in the film, obviously, when the Blob is covering the diner, that's just a matte painting. So they had the plan of electrocuting the Blob. So they called the electric company to, or no, sorry, I take that back. They use a rifle and they shoot the power line. Power line falls in the Blob to no effect. But what it does do is it starts a fire. So Jane, Steve, Danny, and the cafe owners have to hide down in the basement, which is right over here. Right down here is the basement where they had to hide out from the Blob. I don't know if that has always been a vent or maybe that was a window at one time, but they were hiding down there. So while hiding out from the Blob and the fire started, they were slowly running out of oxygen because of the fire. The fire was going to use up all the oxygen that was in there, and they basically would have suffocated to death down inside the basement. The Blob also was working its way inside, trying to get in through the cracks and coming down the stairwell. And in just a moment of desperation, Steve picked up a fire extinguisher and sprayed at the oncoming Blob. The Blob, freaked out and backed up. That's when Steve realized it was the coal. It was the CO2, the carbon dioxide, which caused the Blob to rear back. So he called up because the fire department, not the fire department, the police chief, Dave, tried to call in and talk to them, let them know what was going on. So he calls up through the phone, which is still hanging off the hook, and tells Dave, get CO2. It can't stand the cold. Get CO2. I'm standing outside the Samuel K. Barkley Elementary School. In the film, this was the high school. It may have been the high school back then. I didn't really check the history on that. But this is the high school that the principal, Mr. Martin, Jane's father, and the boys come up to get the fire extinguishers to defeat the Blob. So in the movie, Jane, Steve, Jane's little brother, and the diner owners were trapped down inside the basement where the Blob was trying to consume them by covering up the diner. In the meantime, a fire had started and they were trying to put out the fire. That's when Steve discovered that the Blob doesn't like cold. And so he calls up to the phone that was still hanging off the hook that they need to use CO2, carbon dioxide, in order to stop the Blob. The police chief hears it, Dave, and tells everyone else, hey, tells the firemen, hey, we need CO2. Where can we get more CO2? Because I don't gonna have so much, the fire department. So that's when Mr. Martin said, hey, I know where we can get a whole bunch over at that school. So the boys come up here and they actually drive the cars right here on this pathway. And then they walk up to this entrance right here. Of course, the door is being locked. They had to find a way in, and that's by taking a rock and smashing out this window pane so they can get in and grab all the fire extinguishers. They then run out the door, back down the stairs, into the cars, and they drive off. Now, location-wise, this school is only about a 10-minute walk from the Colonial Theater. So, I guess if you want to use the general locations of the diner in relation to the theater, where in the film they're supposed to be right across the street from each other. So the school was not too far of a drive to get out there. So they were able to get the fire extinguishers quickly to get back to the diner to defeat Blob. And so now, with the help of Steve's friends and the fire department, they had enough CO2 to where they could actually freeze down the Blob and get it frozen solid. And there, they had to figure out what to do with it. Couldn't burn it, couldn't kill it. So the idea was to take it someplace where it will never unfreeze. And so the idea was to get an army plane, keep it frozen, load up into this army plane, and just drop it somewhere up in the Arctic where it would never ever unfreeze at all up in the Arctic. I see a sequel coming on. Can you imagine? Polar ice caps melt and the Blob seeks its revenge. So, thank you for joining me on this, my first inaugural video of the horror, the terror. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you happen to see me in different clothes, that's because this is the first day of filming. Tomorrow is the actual day, is the day of the actual festival, and so I'll be doing a lot of filming there as well. But I'll have that intercut. So I'm not just changing my clothes, every other scene or anything like that. No, that'd be stupid. So have fun and make sure you're an organ donor. Give the gift of life, and I'll see you down the road. Take care. Bye bye.